Hello and welcome. It's so nice to see all your happy faces here today. And if you're joining us via TV, thank you for welcoming us into your homes. I'm Pastor Michael Smith, and I'm here to welcome you to our 40 days of teaching, preaching, and prayer. This is day 39, so if this is the first time you're tuning in, and you're kicking yourself for having missed some, don't you worry. There's still a lot to come. Today we'll be welcoming Pastor Roger Hernandez in a bit, and in fact he'll be our preacher for tomorrow, and on Wednesday Pastor Lane will be here. A few quick announcements then would be that we will be partnering with a media partner known as, and I'm sorry, it's slipping my mind for just 1 second, Guardrail Media. It's a social media platform by which you can learn how to better contribute to the work of ministry, to sharing the gospel and the good news of Jesus Christ to the people around you. So if you are curious and wanting to know more about it, guardrailmedia.com would be a place to go. Thank you once again for coming, and thank you for welcoming us into your home. Enjoy this evening. Good evening. Today we will be welcoming Pastor Roger Hernandez, who will be our speaker today. He is the Ministerial and Evangelistic Director for the Southern Union, and we are so delighted to have him here. He is a father of 4 and a third-generation Seventh-day Adventist, and that must have really worked its way through the genes, because he has a lot of pastors in his family. At least 5 I can think of. And he has written a minimum of 14 books, which is impressive for me because I struggle even to crack open one sometimes. It is so good to have him here, a person who values the practicality of Christianity as lived out in a world that so desperately needs to see Jesus. So, today I hope you will aid me in welcoming Pastor Roger Hernandez shortly after prayer. Jesus, I thank you that you are here with us in this space. May you help us to be more aware of the fact that you are always with us, that you love us and that you care for us and that you have good news to share for our lives and the lives of the people around us. May you give us the courage to bless a world that needs to know you more. Amen.
If you are a Christian, every day when you wake up, you have to ask yourself 2 important questions. Number 1, what breaks your heart? And number 2, what are you going to do about it? One has to do with your purpose, and the other one has to do with your action plan. Let me tell you what breaks my heart. What breaks my heart is to see young people disconnect from God, be de-church, unchurch, ex-church, ex-Christian. And today I want to talk to you about the story of a prodigal that came home, raising the hope and the expectation in us that God can indeed do something with the prodigals that have disconnected from Him. The text that we are going to look at is found in Luke chapter 15. But I want to tell you a story about a friend of mine. He was raised Catholic. He was baptized by the Pope himself. His name is Giorgino, and when he was a young man living in Rome, he went to school. It was a religious school, and he went to school and asked the priest, "What certainty can you give me that God exists? How do you know for sure that God is real?" And the priest got very angry at the question. He says, "We don't question spiritual authority. We don't question people in power. You have to go home and get your parents to come and apologize." Giorgino decided at that time, he was 10 years old, that if religion was not to be questioned, it was not to be engaged. And he became an agnostic at 10 years old. He went home and told his dad, and his dad said, "If you can't ask any questions, you don't have to go back to that school." And at 10, he decided that God was not real, at least not to him. And he lived without God in his life. Fast forward, and Giorgino is now a young man, and he's graduated and has a finance job. He's making a lot of money. And he meets this girl who was an ex-Adventist. She also was raised in the church and disconnected from a different spiritual tradition. And they meet and they fall in love and they get married. Neither of them goes to church. Neither of them have anything to do with God. But then children come, and they have 2 children. And if you don't believe in God and you have children, you at least know that the devil is real, just in the way that they act. But here's Giorgino, and he says, there must be something more to life. But I don't like institutional religion. They're out to enrich themselves. I'm not even sure that God exists, but there must be something more that I'm missing. His wife said, I want you to come to church with me. I was raised at Seventh-day Adventist. I want to look for the nearest Seventh-day Adventist church. I want to take you there. And he reluctantly agreed, went with her to church. And when he tells the story, he said that his first experience in church was not very good. It seemed like the pastor was angry, that all he could talk about was the kids that were making noise and reverence. Nobody greeted him. Nobody said hi. Nobody engaged him. He left and said, this is not fun at all. What is this church? Is just like my other church, cold and aloof. But time kept passing, and he kept going to church because his wife forced him to go. And finally, there was a moment of crisis. Giorgino and his wife had issues. They had marital issues. And the pastor, who's a friend of mine, was asked to go to their house to give them marriage counseling. During a whole year, he gave them marriage counseling. He talked to them about the gospel. And he talked to them about Jesus. And he talked to them about the wonderful truths of the Sabbath and how that can enhance our home experience. And he said, well, that's different than the first experience that I had in church. And Giorgino started to develop a relationship with this pastor. This year, Giorgino planned a skiing trip with his family. They were in Colombia, got all their ski gears ready, put it in a UPS truck. On the way to the airport, the UPS truck was robbed. The only thing they stole was Giorgino's and his family's ski gear. But he said, not to worry, we can rent some. Because they've been looking forward to this ski trip they were about to go on. They were getting on the plane to leave Colombia to go to the ski trip when Giorgino slips and falls on the tarmac and breaks his hand. Giorgino has to get off the plane, has to go to the doctor. The doctor said, no skiing for you. You have to rest your right hand. You cannot go on the ski slopes. His kids, who were teenagers now, were so angry. We were not talking to Giorgino. So Giorgino calls my friend and says, I cannot go skiing. We have spring break. I want to leave my house with my family. What do you suggest? And my friend said, you know what? We have an evangelistic series starting in my church. The title of the evangelistic series is We All Have Problems. And why don't you come here to Collegedale? Collegedale, Tennessee, for the ones who do not know, it's known for trees. There's a lot of trees. There's not much to see except Southern Adventist University, which is fantastic, but that's about it. There's a couple of restaurants, a couple of stoplights. Collegedale, Tennessee. So now the kids, if you can imagine, these kids, teenagers, go from going to the snow to going to church for a week. But they came. On the first night of the evangelistic series, I met him. Him and his wife, great people. Immediately he told me, I like Jesus, but I'm not into institutional religion. I'm not into institutions. I don't trust institutions. But he came, and on the second night he came back, and on the third night he came back, and on the fourth night he came back, and on the fifth night he came up for the call. And on the 8th day, on Saturday morning, Sabbath, him and his wife were baptized into the church. They already knew the doctrines. They just needed to make the last decision. The reason why he decided to make a decision was not only the doctrines of the church, or those were powerful and a blessing to him. He decided to make a decision based on the friendliness and the embrace of the church, that from the moment his kids got there, they were embraced by other kids. The warmth. He says, even though I've only been coming to this church for 8 days, it feels like I am part of a family. From that story, and from the story of the prodigal son, we glean some specific principles about outreach and evangelism and making church a place that unchurched people want to attend. There are 3 principles from the prodigal son story that we must understand. And in case you don't know what the story is about, it's a son who becomes rebellious, leaves home, spends everything, goes into ruin, comes back home, is embraced. There's a party and an older brother who's mad. That's the summary of the story. From the prodigal home story, if you're listening to me and you're part of a church, you can make a difference in the lives of the people who attend who are far from God right now. 3 things about the prodigal son's story. Number 1, what brought the prodigal home was need, not theology. This is not to say that theology is not important. This is not to say that theology is not needed. But what brought him home was need, not theology. Look at the text. Luke chapter 15 and verse 14. After he has spent everything, need. There was a severe famine in the whole country. Need. And he began to be in need. And he came to his senses and said, how many of my father's servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. Need. I will set out and go back to my father, disconnected from his father. Emotional need. Physical need. Disconnection. Lack. There are very few people, whoever it is that's watching me right now, wherever you live, whether it be a small town or a large city, there are very few people in your community, if any, who are sitting home right now. People who are far from God. There are very few of them, if any, sitting at home right now, saying to themselves, I wish somebody would knock on my door so we can have a religious argument. I wish somebody would knock on my door so we can argue about religion. What brought the prodigal home was need, not theology. Over 100 years ago, Ellen White said that Christ's method alone will bring success. And she lays out a 3-tier strategy to reach the people that need God the most. This is the strategy to reach our communities. In a society that is post-Christian, in a society that is ex-religious, that do not give the benefit of the doubt to religious institutions. In fact, they're very distrustful of religious institutions. What is going to break down the prejudice is not to start off with a religious argument or conversation, but meet the people where they are, not where we want them to be. This is a passage from Mount of Blessings, page 136. She says this: a religion that leads men to place a low estimate upon human beings, whom Christ has esteemed of such value as to give himself for them, A religion that would lead us to be careless. And then here's the 3-tier strategy. A religion that will lead us to be careless of human needs, sufferings, or rights is a spurious religion. In slighting the claims of the poor, the suffering, and the sinful, we are proving ourselves traitors to Christ. It is because men take upon themselves the name of Christ while in life they deny his character that Christianity has so little power in the world. The name of the Lord is blasphemed because of these things. So here she says, human needs, sufferings, and rights. I would put it this way. The 3 levels will be the following. Number 1, level 1 is charity. This is where we meet people in their immediate, urgent needs. Somebody needs some food because they ran out. Here's a box of food. Somebody needs to get their light bill paid off. Here's some money for your light bill. 1 month of rent. Here's a coat for the winter. Here are some sneakers for your child. Here's a backpack for the school year. Those are charity. This is what we do in most churches. Most churches don't have an issue extending charity to the community. Most churches have some type of food distribution service. Most churches will have a closed closet that they can give out. Most churches will have a fund where they can draw from, that they can help somebody that's in urgent need. We have very few issues in level 1. But she says there's needs, sufferings, or rights. Level 2 is certification. This is when the church says, I'm not only going to give people a fish, a vegan fish, if you don't eat meat, I'm not only going to give people a fish, I'm going to teach them how to fish. Certification is when the church says we're going to give classes on marriage. We're going to give classes on parenting. We're going to give classes on diet. We're going to give classes on how to get financially out of debt. We're going to give classes to help you certify you in a job so you can have some skills that an employer might find attractive. As I look at the landscape of churches, especially in the union where I work, and I would probably think it applies to our whole division, probably 90% of the churches that I come in contact with have some type of charity involvement in the community. They do distribution of food, they give out some clothes, they go in the community and feed the homeless. They have some type of charity event. I would suggest to you that about 20% of churches have some type of certification program going on. That means 80% of the churches stop at level 1. Here's the fish. I hope you enjoy it. But the 3rd level is the one that we as Adventists don't usually get involved in. And for some, it's a tricky situation because she says we are careless of human needs, that's level 1, sufferings, level 2, and rights, that's level 3. This is where not only charity and certification, but systemic change. I have a friend who's a pastor in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, California, human trafficking is incredibly prevalent. And when a pimp would get arrested because of human trafficking, they would get a slap in the wrist and released usually the next day. But my pastor friend, along with other community leaders, got together with political leaders and got together and talked about the problem of human trafficking. And they were able to change laws. So now the penalty for a pimp who's trafficking young women in that area gets a tougher sentence. They made a specific change. So charity is giving somebody a fish. Certification is teaching somebody to fish. But change is helping, so there is systemic change, so people are able to aspire to own a house that has a lake with fish in it. And we can be involved in our communities in all three levels, in every community, every single community, wherever you are watching this. There are 5, I call them the 5 H's. There are 5 H's in every community you can be involved in at the 3 levels. Hunger. Every community has hunger. Homelessness. Every community has homeless people. Human trafficking. It doesn't matter if you live in a small town or a large city or a multi-million person city. There is human trafficking. It's right under our noses. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is the belt of the Bible Belt, the greatest demand is for 7-year-old boys. It's in the middle of the Bible Belt. Human trafficking there are more slaves now than ever before in human history. Number 4 is health. Every community needs health. We are getting more obese. There are food that is processed. The health is going down the drain. Access to health care, access to health information is lacking, even in an information overload system. Help is the last one. So hunger, homelessness, human trafficking, health, and help in every community. What is going to break down the barriers? Understand what I am saying. When a person who is a millennial, who's Generation Z, who is an ex-Christian, who is a person who's never been associated with religion, they in general don't have a positive attitude towards religion. You are not starting the game 0-0. You're starting the game down 2 goals to 0. You are starting the game with them understanding and thinking that you are out for yourself, that you don't care about people only getting richer. They have a distrust and a mistrust of organized religion. So how do we break that barrier? We break it by service. And it's interesting that over 100 years ago, Ellen White wrote something that is applicable now more than ever. So number 1, what brought the prodigal home was need, not theology. Once you provide for the need, then you can present biblical truth in all its glory. Number 2, the second thing that we have to understand from the story of the prodigal son is that killing sacred cows and reaching lost people go hand in hand. Notice what the father said in verse 23 of chapter 15. He said, "Kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast." This is what I'm telling you today. You can have your cow or you can have your son, but you cannot have both. Every church has sacred cows. Every church has sacred cows. Large churches, small churches, medium-sized churches, country churches and city churches and black churches and Anglo churches and Hispanic churches and Chinese churches and Korean churches. Every church has sacred cows. Every church has some things that we don't change no matter what. Sacred cows this is how we do things here. In this church, we march from the back. In this church, we come from the side. In this church, the deaconess always wear gloves for communion. In this church, we always start at 10:40, never at 11. In this church, and when a new pastor comes, there is always somebody who waste any time to tell the pastor what the sacred cows are. There's this picture in the lobby that has a lot of dust in it, and it doesn't match any of the decor, but we don't move that because that was donated by the builder of the church. Every church has sacred cows. And the question that you have to ask yourself is, you can have your sacred cow or you can have your son, but you can't have both. So you have to analyze and think, what are the sacred cows? This is not doctrine. This is methodology. And you have, as a church, you have to be able to marry your mission, but only date your methods. You can't elevate methods and methodology higher than the mission. So you have to ask yourself, what are the just because programs in my church? What are the just because programs? You know what a just because program is? These are things that we only do just because. I went to a church and I was consulting with them. And they said that they had been in that community for a long time, and over the last 10 or so years, maybe longer, they had baptized 20 people a year, and they were 90 when it started, and they were 90 10 years later. But they were baptizing about 20 people a year. So I'm not really good at math, but that math doesn't really add up. So I started talking to them. I started asking them, so what kind of programming do you do? And they said, well, we have a women's program, and once a month the women come and we have tables, and everybody's dressed in white, and they have their gloves, and it's Sabbath afternoon tea, and we have a spiritual thought, and we bond as the ladies of the church. We bond and we connect, and it's fantastic. It's a great time. So my question is, how many women from the community are coming to your Sabbath afternoon tea? And the answer is none. So the question is, so why do you do it? And the answer is, just because. Men's breakfast. You know that one time a month where men get together on a Sunday morning and they cook food that is very nasty and nobody wants to eat it, but they want to get away from their wives, from the honey-do list on Sunday morning, and they come together as men. So how many men from the community are coming to the Sunday morning men's ministry? None. So what do you do it? Just because. If you have pathfinders and there are only pathfinders from the church, you're doing it wrong. If you have adventurers, it's only adventurers that are members of the church, you're doing it wrong. If you have meetings for youth and only youth from the church are coming, you're doing it wrong. If you have small groups and only church members are coming, you're doing it wrong. It's just navel-gazing. It's just connecting with us. It's FUBU church, for us, by us. And at the end, it's just us. Somebody said that sacred cows make great hamburgers. So if you want to do something radically biblical, you have to look and analyze your programming and your ministries that you have in the church and ask yourself, how many of these do we do just for us? And how many of these do we do for the people that need God the most? If we are honest, we have sort of like an internal spending habit where we only spend money, and we mostly spend money for stuff that has to do with us and our children's ministry, and to pay the bills in our church, and for our youth to go on mission trips, and for our women to do things and go to their retreats. And evangelism usually in church budgets, if it has a line item, is not very big. You have to ask yourself, why do we exist? The church does not exist for me. It's not about the music that I like. It's not about the sermon content that I like. I go to church not to be fed, but to feed other people. There is another church who was pastored by a friend of mine in a place that will remain nameless. They were not able to reach the community, and they said to the pastor, we have to do something. So a new pastor comes in and says, let's do some outreach, and let's start reaching our community for Christ. Let's start a food bank. On Wednesday night in that church, there were about 12 people that attended Wednesday night prayer meeting. 12, it's just like a disciples. And the pastor said, let's do on Wednesday nights a food bank. So they said, all right, let's put together all the boxes. And on a Wednesday night, church was started at 7. At 6, there was a line of people outside the door. About 54 community guests came to receive their food boxes. And the pastor said, all right, we're going to hand out the food boxes at 8, but you're welcome to come in, and if you want me to read something from the Bible to you, it's fine. If you don't want to, it's fine too. You don't have to come to church so you can get a box. We're not going to force you to come to church so you can receive. We're not trying to do any of that. But since you're here, if you want me to read some passages or tell you some stories about the Bible and give you like a little encouraging message, you're welcome to come in. Of the 54, over 40 came in and stayed for the church service. So it went on one Wednesday night from 12 people to over 50. The pastor was ecstatic. On prayer meeting night, the church was full, and most of them were guests. How do you think the church members reacted, at least some of them? He went to visit a couple of them that stopped coming on Wednesday night. He said, I see that you stopped coming on Wednesday night. What happened? Oh, it doesn't feel like a family anymore. I remember when we knew everybody. And we knew everybody's name, but here's all these people. They just come for the loaves and fishes. They don't really come for Christ. Who are they? They have rowdy kids. They go underneath the pews. Who knows where they come from? Who's aware of their intentions? Who knows what they're trying to do? So here's the pastor, ecstatic, and it was like Debbie Downer. It's like, deflated. The pastor kept going. He said, we're going to start some classes for the community. So they started some citizenship classes, and they started some leadership classes. They went to a factory in the town and said, if you have some people in your factory who would like to receive some leadership classes, send them to our church. We're going to give them some leadership classes. And part of this leadership class was this guy who was from Ecuador. And in Ecuador, he was a professional choir director. He told the pastor, I'm not a member of this church. I'm a professional choir director. If you want me to put together a community choir for the Christmas program, I'll do it for free. In appreciation for the classes and the citizenship classes and the GED classes that you're giving to the community, I will do this. The pastor once again was ecstatic. He told the music director from his church that there was a professional choir director that was volunteering his time to create a community choir. How do you think the music director felt? Oh, pastor, we can't bring somebody in who's not from this church to lead the community choir. They're bringing in strange fire. Sometimes there's a reason why churches are the way they are. There's a reason why the churches are the size that they are. Because it's this internal focus. It's about for us and by us. And before people come here, they have to jump through a million hoops. Last experience from that same church is a church is incredible. The pastor said, we have to do a Christmas program for the community. We're going to have a banquet. There's a lot of kids in this community that don't receive any gifts. He sent out the word. 175 community guests came to the Christmas banquet. Year number 2, 225 community guests came to the community Christmas banquet. On year number 3, the board got together and told the pastor, Pastor, you've done 2 years of a community banquet and Christmas for the community. When are you going to do a banquet for us? This is the problem. When we think that church is geared towards us, that we come to be fed, that I'm going to church so the pastor can help me, you misunderstand. First of all, biblically, we don't go to church, we are the church. Church is not a building, church is a living organism. So when we attend a religious service, we don't go there so we can be fed and so we can be helped, but that we can help and serve other people. So ask yourself, what are the just because programs in your church? And finally, if you want to be able to reach your community, you have to understand that people come primarily not for theology, but for need. And once you meet their need, then you can talk to them about the wonderful truths of the Bible. People are not primarily and initially interested in having a religious argument, but they're interested in what's going to happen with my kids, the allure of drugs, pornography, the problems in my marriage, the problem that I might be fired from my job, I'm feeling ill and I don't really know what to do with my health, the interpersonal fights among my family. I'm concerned about what's happening in my community. I'm concerned about finding a place that I can live in that does not charge me $2,000 a month. These are the essential needs. And when we are involved in helping in the 5 H's in those needs, then it opens the door so we can share the wonderful news that God has given to us. Number 2, you have to ask yourself, what are the sacred cows that I need to put to rest? What programming have I elevated to the level of idol? And you know whether you have an idol or not by the way people react when you try to change it. And the last one is, if you want to reach your community as a Seventh-day Adventist congregation, a Christian, a follower of God, you have to be angry at the things God is angry at, and not angry at the things God is not angry at. And that's an important and significant distinction. Let's go to the story of the prodigal home again. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants, "What is going on?" "Your brother is back," he was told, "and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return." I have a brother who is far from God. I have a brother who many years ago decided that church and him were not in the same wavelength. He has a career. He has a lovely wife. He is not a drunk. His life is not falling apart. He just sees very little use for religion. He doesn't see it as evil. He sees it as irrelevant. And I'd rather somebody hate me or love me. But when somebody ignores me, that's a problem. If my brother decided tomorrow that he was going to come home, that he was going to return to God, for sure, I would never have the response that I see is troubling to me, is interesting to me. The response of the older brother, chapter 15, verse 28. And the older brother was angry. Angry is not what I would go for. Happy, thankful, glad, grateful. But angry is not what I would go with. Why is the older brother angry? He's angry because he thinks it's unfair. And grace, by definition, is unfair. We don't deserve it. The problem is that the older brother does not understand a simple principle, and it's this. When the younger brother comes home, the Bible describes him as living in a very faraway land, and he comes home. But the older brother comes home, and he's out in the field. What the Bible is trying to teach us is that neither of them were in the house. One was further than the other, but both of them were far. Just one is further than the other. Let me explain it to you this way. If I were to take your whole church, all 50 of you, or 500 of you, or 25 of you, whatever it is, if I were to take your whole church, we'd go in a bus, and I would drive you down to the coast. And I would drive you down to the coast, close to Seattle or Portland, the West Coast, LA. And I will take you to LA, and we will go to the beach, and I would tell every single one of you, all right, get out of the bus and get in the water and start swimming. Our goal is to reach Hawaii from LA. Get at it. And only the ones that make it to Hawaii are going to make it to heaven. And there you go. You have your deacons and your deaconesses and your elders and people that deal with children and people that don't do anything but are there every weekend. And everybody gets in the water. And some of them swim for a mile and they drown. And some of them swim for a half a mile and they drown. Some of them swim for like 100 feet and they drown. Some of them look at the water and drown. But at the end of the day, nobody can swim to Hawaii from LA. It's an impossibility. You cannot do it. If I am one of the people that is in the water, I would take no solace. I would take no great joy. It would not give me any pleasure to say, yes, I drowned, but I swam further than him. He drowned like 10 feet into the water. I drowned 100 feet in. It doesn't matter if you swam 100 feet or even 100 miles, and another person just swam 110 feet or 1 feet. At the end of the day, everybody drowns because nobody can swim from LA to Hawaii. The only way to get from LA to Hawaii is for us to go to LAX, as I have done before, and we get in the plane, and the plane takes off and takes us all the way to Hawaii. That plane is Jesus. We are not saved because we're better than somebody else. We're saved because Christ is better than all of us. We're not saved because we're good. We're saved because Christ is good. So the older brother does not understand the concept that he's also out of the house. He's closer, but he's also out. And the younger brother, he's out. He's further, but he's also out. Both of them, both the older brother and the younger brother, need grace. So he becomes angry because he does not understand grace. When you don't understand grace, you say, it's not fair. It's not fair that God saved that person. It's not fair that God is blessing that person. He becomes angry. If we're going to reach the world for Jesus, we have to become angry, align our anger with the things God is angry at. Let me give you a list of the things God is not angry at. God is not angry at the fact that somebody ate a chicken soup versus tofu. God is not angry at the fact that somebody wore a little makeup. In fact, Some people need it. God is not angry at the fact that somebody used another version other than the King James. The things we separate about, the things we fight about, in the context of heaven, some things are worth fighting for. But if you fight about everything in constant Facebook posts, and it seems that Christians in North America are more known for the things we oppose than the things that we are for. We are against drinking and against secular music and against smoking and against drugs and against premarital sex and against, and we're every time they think about Christians, when they asked unchristians, what do you think when you think about Christians? What they think when they think about us, they don't think that we have some principles, but we do a lot of good. All they think about is they're intolerant. They hate the gay community. They don't like. They're against. I want to be known for the things that I am for. So instead of just talking about how we are against infidelity, let's talk about how we are for fidelity. It's the same thing. It's just a different perspective. There is too much hate and fighting even among us. I wonder when I see two Adventists engaging on social media and going at it from different perspectives, on music and ordination and church structure, whatever it is that they're going at it. And I wonder, what would an unbeliever think when they saw us engaged that way? What goes through the mind of a person who's far from God? Would he be more inclined to join us as he sees the way we treat each other? Because he said, well, if they treat each other like that and they know each other, what would they do with me that they don't know me? You have to align your anger with the things God is angry at. So you ask yourself, what is God angry at? What makes him upset? Well, let's read the Bible. The Bible says that there are 6 things that the Lord hates. 7 that are detestable to him. And here they are. How many of them have to do with drums, diet, and dress? Just read the text. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. What I see God saying here is that he is very interested in how we relate to each other. In fact, in Matthew, he says that what separates us from somebody who's an unbeliever is not that we have the right beliefs and they don't, is that we are able to forgive our enemies. And we're able to treat our enemies in a way that is different from a person who does not know Christ. So what are you angry at? Are you angry at the Christmas tree? Are you angry at the fact that there was a background drums in the soundtrack? Are you angry at the fact that there was cheese in the potluck? What gets your blood boiling? I would say align your anger at the things that God is angry at. God, when he looks down to earth and he sees the way that we relate to each other, and he sees the kids that are growing up without dads, and he sees drug use that is rampant, and we can do something about it. When he sees a child in a food desert in North America, when he sees a child that is trafficked for sex at 7 years old, that should get our blood boiling and say, I'm going to do something about injustice. I'm going to do something about racism. I'm going to do something about division. I'm going to be a voice that unites, not separates. Be angry at what God is angry at. God is not angry at the things that we fight about many of the time. So let's review. We said, if you want to be a person who is involved in the community, if you want to be a church that truly is a light, that if you were to leave, people in your community would say, yeah, we miss those guys. There's 3 things you have to know. First of all, what brings prodigals home is need, not theology. Start there. Number 2, you have to ask yourself, what are the sacred cows that we have? And honestly, take an honest look at all our programming. Do we need, it's a church of 25 members, do we need 25 programs? Instead of doing 25 programs with mediocrity, why don't we do 2? Well done. What are the sacred cows? What are the things that we've raised, that are methodology that we've raised to a level that is almost sacred and unchangeable? And number 3, what are we angry about? What do we fight about? What gets our blood going? There was a church in the east side of the United States that is in Gwinnett County in Atlanta. And when they were building the church, they said, instead of putting future home of the church and the church name, they just put hashtag 4, not the number, but FOR, for Gwinnett. And they put a hashtag, they put it on social media, and you see members of that church with their shirts for Gwinnett, bumper stickers for Gwinnett, a whole social media. And that church is a couple of thousand members, went into the community, and there was right next to the church, there was a donut shop. And in that donut shop, it was really slow during the summer months. And that the church went and said, what's your slowest month? They said, and the lady said, July. July is the slowest month. Nobody ever comes to get donuts. And he says, well, on July, everybody from the church came and bought out their donuts. This is the impact. So in that town, that church is known for what they stand for. That church is known for what they're doing instead of what they are against. I would invite you, I would challenge you even, to think to yourself, if my church was to disappear tomorrow, would my community miss it? I hope the answer to that is yes. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, break our hearts for the same things that break yours. In Jesus' name, amen.